Okay, hopefully it's recording. Can you guys see my screen over here?
Yep.
All right, got some nods. All right, so if you want to type some stuff, let's create a new class. We talked about cat, so let's create a cat class. And we'll remove it from our dog class because it's kind of just shoehorned in there. All right, so class cat. Again, you just got to use the class keyword. That's mandatory. The name you give it is up to you, but it's got to be one word. You can't have spaces. I can't say cat, fancy cat, or whatever. It's got to be one word. Same naming principles, but use camel case. I'm going to call it cat to be simple. And then the init method, right? I think that's the question in play here. Did you have any specific question, or just want to talk more about it?
No, I think I just made it make sense in my head.
Okay, so I'm just going to go over it a little more in detail, just in case I was unclear about it in the lecture. Init is a pre-built method, so you have to name it double underscore. So these are what Dunder methods are formatted like. They have 2 underscores to start, then a name, and then they end with 2 underscores. So if you looked at that page on the curriculum, there's a link to a Dunder methods page. There's a bunch of Dunder methods. You might not use all of them or any of them, or you'll use some of them, but a lot of them might be new, and I've not used most of them on that page. But the init one you will use for sure, because this is the initial method that gets called, hence the name init. It takes in a default parameter of self, as in it automatically gets passed, and this happens for every method. So if I create a new method like called sound or speak, self automatically will get passed to it, and I have to capture it. So I have to give it a name. Again, I could name this whatever. I could say whatever, but that first parameter in a method of a class will be a reference to the instance that's calling this method. So in this case, if I want to call it whatever, I can, but just to conform norms, I'll call it self. All right, and then this will take no parameters, so I'm going to print out whatever cat would say. All right, so the init method, as I said, is special. This is where you usually want to create instant methods, or instant attributes, but you don't have to. So in this case, let's say cat has a name, so I might want to pass in a name here. So I'm just going to mirror this name, and then let's say cat also has an age, and then I don't know, favorite toy. So then I'll just create instant methods to kind of capture those: age, name, self.favorite toy equals favorite toy. All right, so pretty simple attributes here. I'm going to give a class attribute just to give that example. So sound will be meow. Spell that. And here I'll just print out self.sound. All right, so this is a basic class. We have an init method, which usually you will create if you want to pass in parameters when you create the object. If you don't want to, you could totally get away without having this init method. This is optional if you don't have any parameters you want to set ahead of time. So in this case, I can just do, cat equals cat and just pass nothing. So I have these parentheses. These are mandatory to create the object. This will create a cat object with no default instant attributes. It still has a class attribute of sound, but this cat otherwise has no instant attributes. There's nothing too interesting about it. So the cat can still speak, right? Because there's a speak method. Let's clear this and run Python cat. All right, cat says meow. Nothing revolutionary there. But yeah, init method, optional, but usually you want to have it when you're passing in parameters. So in this case, this will kind of force you to have a name for your cat. So again, these are stuff that, if you want every instance to have something, you create the init method to force whoever's using your cat method or your cat class to have stuff in it. So call him Felix, age 4, and favorite toy will be, I don't know, fish, squishy toy. I don't know. So in this case, I have to pass these values in because there's no default values for them. So every cat's going to have a name, an age, and a favorite toy based on the way I've designed this. Any questions on init method? Or Kyle, did I answer your question or confuse you more?
I've got a question.
Sure.
So I've kind of started messing around with this guessing game. And one thing I'm confused about is, So initially you put in the answer as part of the init, but we don't have a guess until you call the guess method. What's the best way to like initialize the guess to none, or like normally you kind of define that up front so that you could call other methods where it needs that guess value?
Right. So in that case, you would still create it in your init method. But in that case, let's say favorite toy was my guess, for example. I can say none. So you don't have to assign it values from parameters. You can initialize instance values. So let's say, every cat clause equal, they have 2 sets of clause or 4 sets of clause. Again, this could be a class method, but if I want to have it unique to instance, I could default, create default values here. I guess clause is a bad example, but I could just say, I don't know. I'm blanking here. What else do cats do? Whatever. You can create whatever you want here. I'm not a cat owner. I would like to be. I'm allergic to them, so it's kind of my barrier there. But yeah, again, you can create as many instance attributes as you want or don't want. Yeah, and the example you gave, if you need that guess value and you want it to exist, you would create it here. But if you don't need it until later, you could just let create it as needed.
And it doesn't have to be up in the initial parentheses. Like you can just define stuff down below. So
stuff in the initial parentheses are stuff that the caller or the creator of your cat object will pass. So in this case, I'm forcing the creator to specify a name and an age because I want that in my string method. When I create string, I'm going to print out the name self. So by habit, I would say get familiar and get used to creating str methods because usually you want to print out your objects. And if you don't have it, it's going to print out ugly strings that aren't really descriptive. So in this case, I'm going to return a string, and let's just say self.name is a cat. So yeah, in this case, I definitely want a name, so I'm going to force them to pass a name in. Like age could be optional. I could just not have that required, but in this case, self.age. Okay. Good questions. Keep them coming, please. Okay. So Dunder methods, again, they're special methods. There's a lot of them, so you can read about them online. I'm going to colon there because I always forget it. I definitely went into more complex stuff like inheritance. As you guys saw in the lecture, I created a puppy that inherited stuff from the dog. Again, we're going to go over inheritance, I think, next week. But we could definitely talk more about that a little bit here, just to get more familiar with it. If there's confusion about inheritance, kind of how that works, why you want to do it. Yeah, let's see what else was in the lecture. Donor methods.
I got a quick question about what's this called? Guessing game.
Yep.
So the driver code, should we just copy and paste that and then write our class around it?
I think that driver code will be provided in the files. So we have some files. I think guessing game. Let's open that up. Actually.
Yeah, it's not in here.
Okay, yeah, you might want to copy and paste it. Sorry, I'm not familiar with all the files. But yeah, if we provide driver code, then you can copy and paste it. Here, let me give you guys let's say a couple minutes. And if you guys can take this time to read the guessing game and the Boggle challenge, to make sure you guys understand what it's calling for and just get familiar with it. Again, you might not know all the questions you want to ask, but definitely want to make sure you guys know what you guys are doing tonight. So take a couple minutes there. I'm going to grab some water and keep your questions coming. All right, let's take another maybe 30 seconds just to finish reading both challenges, get a good high-level understanding of what you might be doing. For those up in Screen Boggle. All right. Hopefully that was enough time to kind of scan the challenges for tonight. Any initial questions? Again, I know you guys might not be familiar with what we're doing, but hope you guys understand the problems on a high level at least. All right, so just kind of give you maybe some guidance on the Boggle challenge, not algorithmically, but maybe structurally. So what I like to see you guys do, and it's maybe not specified in the steps here, we're going to want to create a class for the Boggle board, which we call Boggle boards. In this case, it does specify create a class called Boggle board. So the reason why you want to create classes, another reason is it kind of manages states and data for you. Again, you got to implement it, but basically the Boggle board would have different states because like sometimes you're going to shake the board and create new arrangement. So the state of the board will change, and that should be internally managed by the Boggle board. That's the idea of encapsulation. Like it holds all the data internally and does all the logic for you. So like, for example, when you create this Boggle board, someone else should be able to use it without having to do the logic themselves, if that makes sense. It should be a pre-built package that does everything that a Boggle board should do for the end user. So I want to see you guys create a class for Boggle board, which is set in the description. So I didn't see this in the description when I did it, but if you were thinking about this, again, for real world situations, you want to map real world objects to your code. So a Boggle board is an object, or maybe like an object with other objects in it. Then we have a concept of dice. So it doesn't specify, but you should be creating a dice class also. So you could probably get away without creating a dice class, but if you think about it, a dice is a unique object, and we're going to have multiple instances of it. So if you kind of scan the challenge, there's, what is it, like 16, maybe 12 dice. I haven't counted these. 2, 4. I think it's 16 dice, yeah, because you're doing a 4x4 board. So these dice have various values. You can get away by just passing in a dictionary or a list of these dice values and working with that. But again, that doesn't really model the real world. Like dice have properties. One, each face of a dice or a die has a value on it. So those are unique. So those probably are, hint, instant attributes. But dice can also have methods. So in this case, you're going to be rolling dice. So think about what rolling dice actually means. It's going to be effectively a random value you're pulling out of a dice. Like, a dice has 6 faces. You roll a dice, and you get one of them back randomly. So, you could, again, you could complete this challenge without creating a dice class, but I think the more correct way or the more sensible way should be creating a dice class that's separate from your Boggle board, but then your Boggle board interacts with the dice class in some manner. So I didn't go over this in the lecture because it's more about inheritance, but generally the relationships 2 classes can have can be boiled down to is-a or has-a. So in the puppy example, a puppy is a type of dog, but it has additional attributes to it. So in our simple case, a puppy simply had an additional attribute. It said arf instead of woof. So that's what the puppy does, everything that a dog does, but additionally the puppy has something that's a little different. So a puppy is a dog and more. But this is a case of has-a, and in technical terms, that's called composition instead of inheritance. But in this case, a Boggle board has dice. It's not inheriting from dice, or dice aren't inheriting from Boggle board. Boggle board is a concept, and dice is a concept, and they interact through a has-a relationship. So in this case, Boggle board has a bunch of dice and works with dice in that manner. Sorry, that might be kind of confusing, but once you learn more about inheritance, get more familiar with it, I've made this mistake a lot where I use inheritance when I really should be using composition, and it just boils down to how are these 2 objects related? Are they inherited from each other in that they relate to each other directly, as in one inherits properties, attributes, and methods from another thing, or is it more a has-a relationship? So maybe giving better examples, I have 2 parents. So I'm inheriting traits from both my parents. So I probably create an inheritance relationship there where I inherit, like I have 2 parent classes and I'm a child and I have individual attributes myself, but also inherit attributes from my parents. Versus if I have a dog, the dog is not inheriting from me or I'm not inheriting from the dog. So in that case, that'd be a has-a relationship. So if I were modeling this in code, I'd create a person class and create an instance called Encore. And then in that person class, I would have a member or an attribute called dog. And that dog would be an attribute within, I guess, a person class. So in that case, I'm a dog owner, and then dog would be an attribute. Hope I'm not confusing you guys more, but just wanted to highlight, so dice and Boggle boards, that's a hazard relationship. So Boggle board will have a bunch of dice associated with it. Yeah, so you want to have a dice class, have a Boggle board class. I think those are probably the only two classes I can imagine, but if you guys come up with another design, go for it. Like, there's no inherently right way to do it. There are sometimes better and worse ways to do it. So again, you could do this entire problem without classes. You could do it with dictionaries and lists and just functions, but we want to encourage you guys to use classes, and you will hopefully see why classes make sense, like for organizing your code. All right. As I've mentioned before, I hate talking, so I feel like I want to hear from you guys. What questions you guys have, again, from the lecture or from the challenges from tonight that we could try to talk about?
I think I'll have more questions once I start to dig into it a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's understandable. Yeah. Sorry, I'm not trying to force you guys to ask questions, but yeah, if there's any initial questions, we can talk about them. But yeah, I think you guys might have more questions as we go through them. As always, I feel like we haven't been doing this too often, but if you guys want to have like a mid-afternoon breakout session and talk about one of these problems as you guys attempt them, we definitely do it. Again, no pressure. If you guys are better spending your time just coding for 4 hours in the afternoon, that's totally fine too. Just want to do what you guys think is best. What else?
Can I ask a question that's unrelated, but maybe good for the good of the group?
Yeah, go for it.
So with Jest testing files, what should we do with those? Like, they are giant files that we have to seemingly attach to every time we use a Jest test in JavaScript.
Are you talking about the node modules folder?
Yeah, the node modules that go along with that.
I think this question's been asked either in this group or someone else. Let's go over Git Ignore. We might have talked about it. You guys might have heard about it, but maybe not seen it. So let's create a Git Ignore file. So I have Python here. Let's get a JavaScript file in here. Let's just create a JS folder and create something in there. Hello.js. I guess I'll take this opportunity to say JavaScript also has classes. This is more of a recent addition. Use the class keyword also. There's probably more to talk about in JavaScript classes. That's a little different than Python. But for the most part, also has the same inheritance possibilities. But I'm not too familiar using classes in JavaScript, again, because they're kind of new to the language. And I use it more in Python. But they exist, just to get to know about. All right, so we have JavaScript. Let's just print console.log hello world. And let's say we wanted to test this. I'm not going to actually create test cases because we're not actually doing anything. But just want to show how to do Git Ignore. So I do, what was it, npm install Jest. So I'm in my JavaScript folder right now. Actually, I'm not in my JavaScript folder. Oops. All right, so I'm in my animals folder, which is not where I want to be. Make a mistake off. It's going to download a bunch of files and create a node modules folder. Typically, we don't recommend uploading that node module folder. One, because it's a lot of files, and two, because your user, as in whoever is using your code, should be installing node modules by themselves. All right, so I got this node modules folder somewhere. Refresh. Right here. Let's move that. And, all right, so Git Ignore. How do you create a Git Ignore file? You just create a simple file called Git Ignore. It has to be named Git Ignore. You can't use your own name in this case for it to work correctly, but you gotta spell it correctly. So I'm gonna do touch Git Ignore. It's gonna create a Git Ignore file. In here, you specify what you want the Git application to ignore. So the syntax, maybe it's not quite obvious. I probably need to look this up, but node modules is a folder name. And then I do a /star. So /star means anything in that folder is going to be ignored. So this is a folder with anything in it. Also, sometimes if you notice for like Python, you create these PyCache folders automatically. That's not data that you need to upload. That's just stuff that gets created for the execution. So if I were like in let's say this Git Ignore was actually in my external folder here. Yeah, all right, so Git Ignore is actually managing my entire project, my animals folder and my JS folder. So, if I don't want PyCache stuff in there, I'll just do PyCache. And of course, got to spell correctly. I do star. Also, I might want to ignore individual files. This might be the case. So like my PyCache is like PYC folders, like this will ignore it. But if I want to do it like manually also, I could do ignore anything with a PYC extension. Again, so the asterisk is a wildcard character. This will match anything that has a .pyc extension. All right, so if I save this, Visual Studio will kind of manage this for you. So if you notice right now, let's look at my node modules. It has a bunch of stuff in it, and all of these items are in like white text, which means it's kind of actively managed. If I, let's see, let me make a better example. So, sorry, I'm kind of hopping all over the place. Let's just save this. So if I save this, if you notice, my Git node modules should kind of get grayed out if I do this correctly. Actually, the reason it's not doing it is because this is not Git version. So, to initialize a Git project, I do Git Init, and this is actually version this folder. So I've not done that yet, so this is not a Git project. So now that this has been done, I have a Git Ignore, and this should be ignored. Node modules. So this is actually in a nested folder. So apologies if I'm kind of jumping over the place. I'm kind of doing this on the fly, but I have a Git Ignore. I want to ignore my node modules folder, but that node modules folder is not on the base level. It's actually nested in my JavaScript folder or JS folder. So I could do JS/node modules.star. In this case, I'm just going to ignore any node modules folder that's nested in any other folder. So in this case, if I did this correctly, save this. Now node modules should no longer be tracked. I'm not 100% if that's true, so let's do a git status. All right, so here we have untracked files. Node modules is ignored, but for some reason hello.js is ignored. I think it's because I didn't add it. So add hello.js. So look at status. If that goes away. Yep. So my new file hello.js got added, but my node modules is unversioned. But it still should be ignored, so maybe I'm not doing this correctly.
I don't want to derail you, Encore, but I think part of what I was asking was more about if we're uploading or if we're downloading those node modules on every single time we're using it, isn't it just taking up a lot of space on our machines? And should we delete them from our machines, or should we just keep them? What's the best practice there? I guess is more of my question than how to get Git Ignore. Because for Git, I've just been not adding that file.
Yeah, that works also. As to answer your question, sorry, maybe I misunderstood it. So it's kind of user preference. If you find yourself installing Jest over and over, that makes sense to keep it in a separate location outside of your challenges, and then reference it from your challenges. So if I didn't want to download Jest all the time, I might just have that in like my challenges folder next to all my individual challenges, and I could reference it in my spec files. So I don't think I have any example up right now. Clear cd. Yeah, so in this case, if I didn't want to have my node modules folder here, but I had it like a level above, I would need to find the correct path. So if I was using shallow equals, for example, I would need to do like this and like node modules and find it. So basically you update your path accordingly, but you could have it anywhere in your machine is the simple answer, I guess. But it's up to you. Yeah, so if you want to just have one download of Jest and then reference it, you could do that. There's nothing wrong with that. And again, that might make more sense. Again, yeah, than having the same copies over and over. Sorry, I think I did a bad job answering that. But
Encore, why did you add like more dots over there? Like, does it mean the previous?
This is back to like timeline. So if my balance parens file was like a level above, so if I move this file here, then I got to find it accordingly. So in this case, double dot means go up one level. And I was just saying for node modules, if you have it like some other place, you got to manually navigate. So like it might be 2 levels above and then nested in some folder called node module. So sometimes it can be a challenge to find it, the path to it, but that's the only caveat of having the node modules external to your project.
And about Git Ignore, we create Git Ignore on that specific folder where the other files which I want to ignore is like there is Git Ignore 6 sister files. You know what I mean, right?
Sort of.
Like,
So let me do it here in this challenge. So if we can see here, my spec file is currently Git versioned, and VS Code shows an M, which means modified. So let's say, for example, I don't want Git to track this. I'll create a Git Ignore file. Call it Git Ignore. And in this case, I'm going to throw in a JS and use the name of my file. So balance parens spec.js. So if I do this, if I do it correctly, fingers crossed, this should no longer be tracked. So if I save this, wait for that to update, maybe refresh this. Balance parens. All right, I'm failing right now, but ideally this should no longer be tracked by VS Code. All right, sorry, I'm not gonna waste too much more time on this because I'm doing something wrong. But ideally, if you do this correctly, like Visual Studio Code will show it not being tracked anymore.
I don't know if you need the folder name.
I swear this used to work before, but I'm not sure why I can't get it to work. Okay, so what other topics do you want to go over since I'm not doing a good job with Git Ignore right now? All right, I give up. Something's going wrong. Sorry. Git Ignore should work in theory. I did a bad job demonstrating that. All right, so we still have like 15 minutes till lunch, so definitely want to use this to your advantage. Let's see, what else do we talk about? Classes. So yeah, we talked about the fundamental features of OOP. Again, this is like theory stuff. I don't really bother too much with, like, it's more for an interview question. You might be asked, like, hey, what is data abstraction, or can you describe polymorphism? So I just wanted to introduce those topics to you. Again, you're not going to deal with that in this cohort, really. Again, cohort is more about coding, not worrying about theory and stuff. But these four buzzwords will be tied to OOP a lot. So inheritance is the one where we'll go deep dive into. Encapsulation, abstraction, that's more kind of just default features you get by using classes. Polymorphism, as I said, with Python is not as obvious because Python's kind of dynamic already. So like types, you can have a cat class and a dog class that's not related at all. But so long as they both have like a speak method, you can call speak on like an array of objects, and it doesn't really care what type they are, so long as they have that speak method. Questions. All right, so I'm gonna call on some people. Let's talk to Brendan. Brendan, how's it going?
Going good.
How were the challenges over the weekend?
Fine. I did all of them with all the tests and all that.
Gotcha. Which of the 6 are there any that you want to go over? As in, you just want to see maybe a solution for it, or have additional questions? Maybe we go over one challenge in the next 15-ish minutes.
No, not really.
All right. All right. So I guess there's one I had in mind that I guess I had a small stumbling block, and I think it was self-inflicted. But instead of just talking, let me actually pull up some code here. All right, I want this cd. All right, so I think I maybe mentioned something about this being tricky for me, and it was a mistake on my end. So it was a nice discovery, I guess. Okay, so I'm gonna talk about the calculate mode challenge, which you guys hopefully tackled this weekend. You guys had to do it in Python and JavaScript. And this was a case where I tried to do something extra and realized that it's a little different in Python and JavaScript. So I'm gonna show you my solution. just to backtrack a bit, I know some of you guys have asked about seeing solutions posted online. I'm gonna be better about posting them. So from week 1, I'm gonna go back and post all the solutions I have. And then going forward for week 2 and onward, I'm gonna try to post solutions like the day after you guys attempt them. So if you can see, I don't have my code commented properly, and I kind of want to comment it before I kind of upload it, just to have, I guess, a better solution up there. But again, another case, there's many ways to tackle this. This is the way I chose to do it. One other solution might be like, sorting your structure and then kind of going that way. I didn't deal with sorting at all, but kind of your choice. Sometimes the decisions come down to performance. I'm not saying my solution is better performant. In this case, it's a small problem, so the performance doesn't matter too much. But when you're creating solutions, again, there might be 5 different ways to do it. Other factors you want to factor into, like how readable is your code, how well does it execute, like does it take an hour to complete, like even if it gets the right answer, take an hour to do like something simple, probably not the best solution, so you can improve upon it. But let me just talk about my solution here. And then again, if you guys have questions, feel free to stop me. So to calculate mode, mode is finding an item that occurs the most in a given input. So I guess some syntax I'm using here that you might not be familiar with. So I just want to kind of introduce you guys to new aspects of Python. In my input parameter list, I actually have an input of items, and I have this colon list. So you might be like, what the hell is going on here? This is called annotations. And basically, I am providing a hint that I want my input to be a list item. Now, whoever's calling calculate mode does not have to honor that, but it's for, it's to ensure that they're using my module correctly. So if they're using like VS Code, they'll see items and they'll see that it should be a list when they see the definition for calculate mode. So that will tell them, hey, you got to pass in a list, because otherwise it might not be clear, like, hey, do I pass in an integer, maybe a dictionary? They don't know. So this is optional, but it's just to help the reader know that items should be a list in this case. All right, so let's get into my algorithm. I create a dictionary, and then I have a max count variable, and this is going to keep track of what is, or the number of items that is the most, as in which, how many of a certain item occurs the most. So to tackle this, I iterate through my items list, and I use the for in syntax in Python. The first thing I do is I have a ternary. So ternaries aren't always easy to read. So apologies if it's kind of confusing, but let's break down this ternary. So the first case is what happens if it's true. So let's whatever I have highlighted here. This is basically saying if item exists, then sorry, let me highlight this. So I'm looking at this if part. The if part says if item exists in my count dictionary that I created above, then increment that count by 1. However, if that item doesn't exist, as in I've never inserted it into my dictionary, I'm going to just give it a value of 1, because this is the first time I encounter that character or that item, whatever the item may be. So in this case, it's going to increment if it exists, or add or create a count value of 1. Then my second line actually applies that count. So I use item as a key, and then I apply that count value. If the item doesn't exist, it gets added through this call. Else, it'll just update the existing item value in my dictionary. Also, I'm keeping track of max count. So let's say I encounter an item 6 times. My max count item should be 6. Again, it doesn't know which value is the mode, but it's keeping track of the most numerous count. All right, so that's what this for loop is doing. It's basically populating my item count dictionary, counting up each occurrence, and then updating the value in there, and then also additionally keeping track of the max count. So that's my first for loop. Second for loop goes through that dictionary and basically tries to find any item that is equal to max count, because my item count dictionary is keeping track of counts. So in this case, the for loop goes through my item count dictionary, checks if the counter that I was keeping track of earlier is equal to my max count. If it is, then I append it to my mode list, which is what I'm going to be returning. So again, there can be more than one numerous item. For example, if I have an input of copy. So, a simple example, if I had 1, 1, 2, 1, 3, in this case, I have 2 mode values. 2 occurs twice, and then 1 occurs twice also. So in that case, my list will be populated with 2 items. I'm printing just to verify. I don't necessarily need that. And then I return my mode list. Again, this is one way to do it. I'm sure another popular way might have been create a dictionary with counts, and then you might use the sorting function within Python to sort that dictionary, and then just go through it in sort order, and then you see like the first item might have 6 occurrences, next item might have 6 occurrences, then it drops to 5, then you're like, all right, I don't need that 5. But I chose to do it this way. I just didn't want to deal with sorting. So yeah, that was my solution. Any questions on my solution here? Or would love to hear any alternate solutions if anyone had any interesting ways to do it. Any other thoughts? Any other, I guess, designs for this?
What was the issue you ran into?
Yeah, good question. So this issue was actually in JavaScript. So actually, and this is because I kind of misread the problem, but let's say I had a test case. I have one test case here. I'm going to actually jazz up my test case here. And this was maybe, as I said, I misread the problem. The problem, I think, said you have a list of strings or a list of numbers. I kind of read that as you might have mix and match. So let's say I have, a 1 in a string, a 2, a 4, a 5, a hello, whatever. It's just a mix of strings and can't forget donuts and numbers. Whatever. All right, so in this case, I think my mode should be 3 since I put a bunch of 3s in there. All right, but I assumed that one test case for advanced stuff was mixing, matching strings and integers. So if I ran this, let me actually run this test case, but I gotta name it something else. Let's bring up my terminal, make sure I'm in the right folder, clear this, and then let's run my spec file. So Python, what is it? Calc mode spec.py. And gotta have your commas, else it won't work. All right, I ran that. I got two dots, which means I passed both test cases because I got 3 as my output. But let's make this test case a little more tailored to what I want to show. So let's say I had a situation like this, like 2, 2, 1, 3. So in this case, the mode I would expect would be 2 and the 1 string, right? So if I ran this, I would expect 1 as a string and 2 as a number. Ordering, I'm not sure how that would work. All right, I still passed, so I'm good. So my Python solution works. So I actually did this in JavaScript though, and ran into some issues. Maybe some of you guys can guess why that might be happening. Copy this, dump it over here. I'm not using Jest, I'm using the good old-fashioned console.log. But definitely could be using Jest if I opted to. All right, in this case, we do shallow. All right, so my issue here was a quirk of JavaScript. Sure. All right, so I'm going to run these test cases. I have a similar solution, but I think I commented something out. So let me verify. Okay, so I'm going to run this and just take my word for it. My solution in JavaScript is essentially the same thing I had in Python. If I run this, but not here. All over cursor. All right, I want to run my calculate mode spec here. So let's run node, node, and then my file, which is calc mode spec.js. Not good. These are always good. Clear that, run this. All right, so I ran this, and I actually got a false here. And again, take my word for it, the same algorithm I applied in Python, I did for JavaScript. So if you guys maybe know or have figured out, the issue with this solution is my strings and numbers automatically get converted to the same type in JavaScript. And the problem with that is because of the way the objects are implemented. So I have this comment here. The way I'm doing it right now, I'm using only my number count objects, which is done here. So the issue here is when I use my item as a key, if I use quotation 1 or 1 the number, those get evaluated to the same key. So initially when I did this, again, just kind of ignore the stuff here in this comment, when I encountered a string character or a number, that was treated as the same thing. So in this case, if I show you what my actual output is, where's my spec file? The answer here is actually, I think it's outputting 1 only because it thinks there's 3 ones in here, the numeric one and the 2 strings that are 1. All right, so if I ran this now by adjusting my bad test case, that's still wrong, so maybe it's numbers. All right, so I passed my test case now because the incorrect solution is outputting 1 as a mode, even though I have strings and integers here. So again, when I dealt with this, I was like, okay, that's a hiccup I didn't expect. The way I chose to solve it was I created 2 different objects, and I'm taking advantage of this type of thing. So this type of check actually checks to the type of the item. If it's a number, I'll get an output of number, and I'll use this object to keep track of those keys, because those keys should be numeric. And then if it's not a number, I'm going to assume it's a character, and then use my character object. So essentially, it's the same algorithm, except I have 2 different counters going, one for numeric values and then one for string values. So that was the only hiccup I ran into. Again, I don't think this was an expected use case based on reading the problem. But otherwise, the algorithm is the same. I still update the count in the object. I'm using a ternary here. So in this case, my item count object is a reference to either my number count or my char count based on this condition. So again, this is a ternary operator. Get familiar with them. They're really useful. Question mark case is if this is true, or the colon case is if this case is false. So this references the correct object, and I use that reference in my algorithm, do the same thing, update max count, and then at the very end, I had to go through both for loops and match it up with max count. All right, so that was the only hiccup I ran into. Again, this was probably something you guys didn't deal with because you guys probably read the problem correctly, which is a huge part of software development, understanding requirements. But I kind of assumed that maybe you could have lists or numbers and strings in the list, and that kind of made it a fun challenge because it was a wrench in what I expected for this. But otherwise, yeah, that was the mode solution. We're hitting the noon hour, so again, I know I've been bad about eating into your lunchtime last week. I don't want to do that this week, but I don't want to rush you guys. So before we break for lunch, what are your thoughts, feelings, questions, comments, anything? We'd love to hear them. No thoughts? You guys are all good? Feeling good? Feeling good about
I think
the
I'm going to want to talk again about this Boggle once I start into it.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's fair enough. So yeah, again, we'll meet at 5 o'clock for sure. But otherwise, we could have a mid-afternoon breakout session if you guys are stuck or just want to discuss something. All right. Don't want to take away too much from your lunch. So enjoy lunch, 1 o'clock, attack those challenges, ask questions as needed, support each other, and enjoy coding, guys.